readers. My name is Charity, the host of Birchivert Reader Podcast. I'm introverted, but willing to talk about fantasy books. On this podcast, I'll do book reviews, author interviews, and fantasy book discussions. Come join me every week as I explore new realms and talk to amazing people. Hi readers, this is Charity, your host of Birchivert Reader. I have another guest with me today. She is a fantasy author. She wrote Fireheart, which is a YA fantasy novel. Vanessa Lanang. Thank you for jumping on with me today. Tell me about yourself and your book.
So I write YA fantasy. I actually like several genres in YA. By day, I'm actually a book editor. So I edit pretty much all genres of YA and romance. Fireheart is actually technically my third book. I wrote
Okay.
two other, it's like sports fiction books for YA readers a few years ago, but this one's my first full-length book. Those were kind of like novella length. Fireheart takes place at a Dragon Slayer school during an ongoing war for the control of magic, where you have Kalia, a young Dragon Slayer that discovers the school is corrupt. And she searches out her father, who is this commander of the military, while secretly hunting the dragon that killed her mother when she was young. So she comes to find out she lived a very sheltered life and knows nothing of the world of magic because they keep it completely censored in the military school. And like myself, she's of mixed descent and explores themes of not feeling like she fits in between two different worlds. In this case, the Dragon Slayer school and the world of magic. But she does learn that everything we need has always been inside of us, and it's very much a coming of age story of self-discovery in a world full of truths we're not ready to face.
Okay. I like how you describe that because I got through a part of it and I liked how you described it, the coming of age of this main character, Kalia. That's how I pronounce
Kalia.
Kalia. And yeah, they call them the Slayers. Basically, they hunt dragons and things like that. And I like that specifically just because dragons are the enemy in this particular story.
Right.
So you say that you are a editor. What got you into writing in the first place?
The editing part of, I guess, my career has really only been happening in the last few years. I started writing because I've just always been a voracious reader at a really young age. And I was the kid that, like, instead of going out and doing fun things in the summer, I was reading.
Yay, me too.
Yeah. Like, who needs outdoor activities when you have
The library, right? The pizza
right, the
competitions.
Yes, thank you. They need to bring that back. I started writing probably like I would write things like when I was in school, like nothing that was publishable. Just loved telling stories. And eventually I started writing and I did take a little bit of break and I came back to it. I joined a writing group and I don't know, I've spent like the last 10 years kind of writing and honing my craft. And I ended up working with this publisher that we talked very much about how hard traditional publishing is, especially when you're looking for a big five publisher and you need to get an agent. And there's just so many great stories out there that aren't being told. I helped them launch a company for independent publishing.
Wow. Yeah, because I think I was the doom scroll.
Is that what they call it now? The doom
Yeah, the
scroll?
doom scroll. About how much of an impact Amazon had on the publishing company and how competitive it is just to get into the big five publishing. And then once you're in, you're locked in. And I find that very fascinating to those authors because I found lately the ones that are not who more independently published are the best told stories I've been coming across lately. And now I'm like, okay, I need to diverse. And now I'll get away from the big box stores basically and just read more of them. I love it. Yeah, I love that about you, about how you're doing that. Obviously those skills played into editing. Did you get someone else to edit your book or did you edit your own book?
Oh no, I would never edit my own. No, seriously, I mean, like you're too close to the material to
Yeah.
see the mistakes and what other people see. And I always think that collaboration really takes you further. So even if you decide to self-publish your own book, you should really look into getting a professional editor just for
Right.
story structure, for pacing, all those things. You really can't do it on your own.
What would you say is the hardest part about publishing your own book?
I would say, as an introvert, it's really hard to put yourself on a platform and be like, look at my book, the marketing part has really been the hardest part. Like,
Right.
writing is a very solitary kind of profession, and
Mm-hmm.
you get to, create this world, and you do it pretty much on your own. And even when you're working with an editor and someone who's doing your book cover, like, you never really see them. They're like, it's
Yeah.
everything is their email. So you're still
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, it's just you. And then now you have to sell your book after you've published it. It's not natural to just talk about yourself.
Oh yeah, I get that. I mean, I've talked about myself a few times in editing, and I'm like, no, take that out. That's just because it's you're private. That's why I call myself the booktrovert.
Right,
So,
exactly.
in your writing, would you say that you're a planner or a prankster when you're writing?
Oh, so the very, very first book I ever wrote that I had considered for publication, I totally pantsed it. And then when it came to edits, it was the most horrible experience I ever had. And I decided I will never do that again.
Oh,
So now I'm an extreme plotter. I do a
okay,
beat sheet. And then after I've done a beat sheet, I write out all the scenes and I do individual story arcs for every scene. So
okay.
like in Fireheart, actually, like once the chapters were written, I made sure there's actually 3 scenes per chapter, and each scene has its own individual arc.
Oh,
So I
okay.
went to the extreme.
I've heard spreadsheets. I've heard slight prancing, but still planning. So I always love asking that because everyone's writing
Mhm.
style is unique. Have you abandoned any pieces of work that you've done? You have two. I'm assuming they're romances, right?
Oh, which ones?
The
My
sports
first 2
ones.
books?
Yes.
So actually, I wrote those for a book imprint that specializes in what they call the reluctant reader.
Okay.
And what that is basically they're writing content for teenagers, but it's written at a 4th grade reading level for those who that are their reading level isn't quite as high. Because you can't
Okay.
like it's hard for teenagers to read about, to read middle grade books
Mm-hmm.
because the content, they just can't relate to the content. So it's written at a 4th grade reading level. I have a snowboarding book and a basketball book. And so there isn't actually any romantic arc in there. Basically, like individual struggle, coming of age things.
I see a theme coming of age.
Yeah. So
So
I read and write almost 100% young adult.
okay. Have you started anything and then decide to abandon it or planning on revisiting it anytime in the future?
I would say that very first book I ever wrote, that one's in the dust. That one, we're not resurrecting that one. And then I do have a folder on my laptop where I keep like all these things that I've kind of started. I don't know, maybe I'll revisit them. I feel like as a writer, I've grown and it's really hard to go back and revisit some of those older projects that I've kind of started. I am working right now on a short story for an anthology, and
Okay.
it is YA, but it's a little bit kind of like a thriller.
Oh, okay. That's it. Definitely a little different than, a fantasy book. So,
Yeah. I'll revisit fantasy again. I just there was an opportunity, so I decided to write for it.
hey, you never know. You might have a talent or a knack for it. So,
We'll see, we'll see.
so just to talk a little bit about Fireheart, because that's
Mhm.
what we want to promote. What inspired this setting in this world of magic for Fireheart?
So I didn't necessarily start in fantasy. I enjoyed like horror, and I went through this dystopian phase. I'm sure like you probably read like Divergent and Hunger Games and like all these books by Cassandra Clare.
Hmm.
And I kind of slowly shifted into fantasy. I kind of wanted to create a world that I felt like was a little bit different. Like I'm not really into epic fantasy.
Hmm.
And so I kind of wanted to. The interesting thing part about this book is that it had originally started as a fantasy with sci-fi elements in
Okay.
it. And and when I had brought this to critique group, they were like, you kind of got to pick a lane. It's either sci-fi or it's either fantasy. And I mean, now I see things where people do these mashups of both.
Hmm.
There was a lot of science-based elements to the magic
Okay.
that I ended up taking out. And so it's kind of evolved into fantasy only. yeah, I don't know. Like it just when I work on this type of stuff, I just kind of the fantasy part of it does have a kind of pantsed feeling to it.
Okay.
So it's kind of evolved that way. And then of course I go back and I make sure that the rules work and that there's no holes, as you may say.
Plot holes. No one likes them.
Right, exactly.
What inspired you this story? Some people had a dream, some saw a video game. Like, what inspired you for this one?
I just really wanted to write a story about dragons. It kind of came out from there, you know, like I was like, I want to do something, I want to do dragons, but I want to do something maybe a little bit different. And
Mm-hmm.
the the dragons are not they are kind of the enemy in this, but they're not all exactly the same. There are some that are, I guess, are nice, are friendly. I kind of also wanted to, you know, like we were talking about themes, and I do always have this kind of theme of identity in it. And so I also wanted a character that kind of found her is like on this journey of identity, just based in this world that kind of I feel like is a little bit of a reflection of the world that we live in
Yeah,
today.
yeah, because I think that's the main theme is that she grew up in this culture. Her father was the general of the Slayers and everything, and then she's kind of realizing that it's not all the way it seems. It seems like the people above them are cruel and they don't serve justice. They just them even it says in the synopsis they put to death Slayers.
Hmm.
So she's brought to question everything that her whole culture she grew up in. I felt that, and saw that, her doing that, and I think it's just a development of her throughout the plot. As we embark on this journey together, we need your support and ensure our quest continues to flourish. Here are a few ways you can help us. 1. Subscribe. Make sure to hit your subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform. By subscribing, you'll never miss an episode and you'll be the first one to know the new adventures released in the realm of fantasy. 2. Rate and review. Leave us a glowing review on your podcast platform of your choice. Your feedback not only fills our hearts with joy, but also helps other fantasy enthusiasts discover our podcast and join in our adventure. 3. Share with fellow adventurers. Spread the word about Brooktrovert Reader Podcast. Share our episodes on social media, recommend us to your friends, and engage in conversations about your favorite moments. 4. Support us through subscriptions. Your support makes it possible for us to continue bringing you captivating content. Your support keeps the magic alive. Head over to my website to get started today. By subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing, you become an integral part of our quest to celebrate the beauty of fantasy literature. Together, let's ignite the imaginations of countless dreamers and create a haven where stories come to life. How did you develop the magic system in your head? You said you had some scientific things behind it and then you took it out. So,
Hmm.
how did you create that?
So what I tend to do, like when you kind of get an idea, I don't go straight the plotting end of it. I might write a few key scenes that that I've kind of had like in my head that I've brainstormed a little bit, and then I use it kind of as a basis for how I'm going to expand on it. Like I might be like this character, I want them to be able to do this. I have this key scene in my mind, and maybe this is going to happen. And after I write those scenes, I start to take out those fantastical elements, and use them as, I guess, kind of like an outline for the magical world that they exist in.
Did any of your characters are inspired by anybody in your life or anything like that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, like, I would probably base the main character on myself, not that, like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm on any type of fantastical journey.
Are you sure you're not like the magical Batman or something?
Don't tell anybody. But just, I guess, like, personal struggles growing up. I mean, of course,
Right.
like, they're not going to be exactly the same, but just going through trying to figure out where you belong in the world.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, especially as you're a reader.
Right?
People went to summer camps and I'm like, just don't bother me. With you writing, I think you wrote this, did you publish this last year, right? In 2022, right?
Yes.
So this is way before Fourth Wing Hype. Obviously, had you had to fight for any originality when you were writing this story, or how did you go about that? Because I know there's like so much, you edit up quite a bit too.
I actually don't edit too much fantasy. We're fairly selective when it comes to fantasy, just because the market is tough. There's so
Mm-hmm.
much fantasy out there, and like you said, like you didn't even come across some of these indie fantasy books till recently, and
Mm-hmm.
there's so much out there.
Okay, so you said that, with you being an editor, you're very particular about what books you edit in fantasy. Do you have to fight with kind of the originality and finding your own place in the fantasy world with all the competitions out there?
I think it is very challenging. There's so many great fantasy writers, of course, that came before me, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't read epic fantasy. I,
Right.
I, I prefer low fantasy, something that it's a little more accessible. It's not completely like the world building isn't a major part of the book, because like when you read epic fantasy, like there are just pages of what this
Yeah.
world entails. Like I'm in awe of that, to be able to do that. So I do think it is hard for originality, especially when I was bringing this to critique group. There were some fantasy readers in there, and they're like, "Oh, this has been done. This has been done." And I'm like, "Well, I don't. I haven't even read that book. I take it from somewhere." I kind of look at it in the perspective of there are hardly very few original ideas, and
Mm-hmm.
it's really about you putting yourself into that work, and it's in the detail, and
Right.
how you present it would be the best way to look at it. I kind of wanted to, well, maybe this has already been done. I'm going to tell it in the way that I want to tell it. Hopefully people will see the difference in it.
Do you think there is a benefit or to not reading that kind of fantasy that helped you with your novel creating it, because you're not obviously influenced by what they did. You did it by your imagination and your creativity.
I think it helps in the sense that that's not sitting in the back of my head when I'm
Mm-hmm.
writing. I have a little more freedom. But then, I feel like I would have also liked to have read those books or those stories just so that I knew what was out there.
What would you find is the most challenging thing about writing fantasy, and how do you overcome those challenges?
I would say the world building and keeping everything and not missing everything is the hardest
Yeah.
part. Because like when you create a world, you really have to make notes on what you put out there so that all of a sudden whatever magical spell hasn't changed, because your readers will notice. Like even if you
Yeah.
don't notice, your readers will notice where you made a mistake. Now there's a fantastical element that is able to happen that wasn't able to happen earlier in the story. I tend to go in Pinterest and I make a Pinterest board of like scenes and images and things that are in the story so that I have visuals. I'll even print them out and I'll like post them like all over the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Like I look like I'm somebody's demise.
Just as long as there's no red string.
Red strings, exactly. So, my wall will look like that. And then I do character sheets for each of the main characters so that I can remember what color their hair is, their
Mm-hmm.
eyes, what they're wearing, some of their favorite lines. And I think that's the most challenging part, is just keeping it all intact, and that, being really familiar with the world.
I like that, because you're used to like Pinterest being home decorating, wedding planning, and hopefully
No,
those food that you make
I
one
have
day. But
no, mine is like dragons and like fighting with and like archery and like these weird lands that I've managed to find on there.
hey, that's cool. Now I'm like, I need to restructure my Pinterest life,
Yes,
because I didn't think
no
to
more
do that.
DIY. It's fun. There's actually some really great pictures in there. And then I'll pull pictures of what I think the characters look like. So
Hmm.
it's like we were talking about with all these strange pictures with dragons, and then they'll be like Henry Cobble.
This is a random question that kind of popped up my head, and only
Okay.
because you're an editor.
Hmm.
There's a thing going around with the AI. I even saw like another bookstagrammer says, "Hey, for fun, I just wrote a chapter for with AI," and I'm like, "Oh boy, where is this world coming through?"
Right.
So, what are your thoughts on that with AI being evolved, even
Yeah,
as an
it's
editor?
that's really, controversial.
Mm-hmm.
I've also worked in the entertainment industry because I live here in Los Angeles, and I
Right.
have who are in the Writers Guild. I do think that
Yeah.
like I think it's very challenging. I'm not necessarily pro AI in as far as creatives go. There's so many creatives out there, and we already struggle with trying to get our work out there and to being able to make a living off of it. So many creatives have to take second jobs in order to write or make movies
Right.
or create. And I think that like it's right for them to strike and try
Hmm.
to get paid for the work that they're doing instead of it being outsourced to AI. So I think it's really scary for authors that have had success on Amazon and publishing and have made livings now creating books to have somebody who is looking at it more from a business perspective and it's just like, well, I'm just going to throw in an idea, AI is going to write my book and I'm just going to publish it and put it on KU. Because I mean, you can slap a book together. You
Hmm.
get some stock images, some pre-made covers, and have AI, whatever, write your story, how many, and then, you make money. And I
Hmm.
feel like you steal a space from creatives that are putting a lot of their heart into their work in order to create stories that they want to tell.
Right. And I think even AI can design book covers.
Right, exactly. And
So,
then that hurts also people who are graphic designers that
hmm.
depend on creating art. If you're not, I've seen some of these AI websites, they're actually stealing art that's already pre-made and just
Yep.
editing it. And there's like to a certain degree that when you edit it, it now becomes a different copyright. It no longer belongs to the original creator. There's a lot of
Yeah.
gray area in there.
I'm slightly up to date because my sister is aspiring to be a movie director in the thriller genre,
Hmm.
horror, and she's talking about that. It's always interesting to hear about it, especially I did as like when you said California. I was like, oh yeah, that's right, she is in California.
Hmm.
So you're definitely in the trenches.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a WGA writer because I don't do
Okay.
screenplay, but my very close friend is. Like even when before all this happened, just trying to get work and getting paid properly and getting credited properly is a struggle. So then now you throw
Mm,
in like where you're gonna have to fight with a robot, be able to work to survive.
right. When it comes to money, it's like you'll never win, because
Right.
AI is cheap. So, all right, I wanted to ask you because I'm
That's
like,
like a dark turn.
I like getting information about what's actually happening. So that's why I want to
Yeah,
know
no, it's
and
good. It's good. I think it is a topic that needs to be
brought
acknowledged.
up. So you mentioned dabbling into thriller. Is there any other genres that you want to get into writing?
I wish I could say crime fiction, but I'm not good at detective stories. It's not really in my wheelhouse. That's why, like when I edit, I stick to certain genres. I've dabbled in romance. I don't know about necessarily writing a full romance, but I do like to have a little romance
Hmm.
and fantasy. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that. We'll see.
Especially with the romantasy trend these days, I think you
Yeah, I
have to.
don't, I've done contemporary romance, like I've co-written something with another author that's not published. I feel like romantasy is like a whole nother beast. I mean, like I know I've seen on
Hmm.
TikTok how popular it really is, but I'm like, man, how do you write do you write dragon sex? Like, how do you do this?
I saw Snake one version. I didn't read it,
Really?
but
Yeah,
snakes are
you like
no
hard
my
pass.
no zone. And I'm like, no. But yeah, I think it's a genre. It's not romance or fantasy. It's a genre.
It's a genre.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I would feel comfortable editing it because I feel like I can pull from different places. I feel like I
Hmm.
do a good job of seeing the bigger picture and really honing in on the details. But I think writing it, I would be a little bit out of my elements to write romantasy.
Which I've heard, like with some authors, sometimes emotions are hard for them, or action scenes are hard to write in a book. What would you say was hard for you writing Fireheart? If there's any element in it that was hard.
I would say that I had to do a lot of research when it came to the action scenes. Like
Okay.
I felt very comfortable with writing where you have the descriptions of like the dragons flying in and the fire and those, but when they actually had to do like any type of hand-to-hand combat where there was a lot of different things going on like spatially, like you really have to look at it almost like you're filming a movie, I feel like in your head, so that you can
Right.
see all the different elements happening. And when it comes to like the combat stuff, it's like, okay, wait, someone's hand is here, and then you have to do this, and like, how do you
Hmm.
describe that without it being a bunch of words of action just thrown at the reader? And then is it logistically correct? So I
Right.
did have to reach out to someone I know that like does like kung fu in order to make
Hmm.
sure that some of these moves that they're doing is actually feasible.
Right. Is this? I got Asian inspired. Is this Asian inspired kind of a YA, or I'm
I,
guessing?
I don't know if I necessarily intended it to be, but maybe I
Hmm.
did draw a little bit more from Eastern culture just
Right.
because like my background, like I'm half Filipino, so like
Hmm.
that area, like the Pacific Islands and Southeast
Right.
Asia, as opposed to a lot of fantasy kind of picks up on Western culture.
Yeah, because because they did like a moon ritual or something like that, and that's some reason I was like getting those vibes. Good to know the book.
Yeah, no, I didn't pull that directly from any type of like ritual that I know of, but I did want it to have a little bit different feel than, I guess, traditional fantasy that pulls from Western culture.
You wrote, I think the main weapon that they use is archery in
Hmm.
this one, especially when like the first chapter we're jumping into the action and everything.
Yes.
Are you familiar with archery, or did you have to ask for help on that one?
I did a lot of research on this and like
Okay.
even watched like videos, all the different types of arrows, bows, like trajectory of how far they go. And then you can kind of expand it a little bit because kind of under the influence of magic, so their
Mm-hmm.
powers are a little bit more heightened. But yeah, no, I don't do archery, although I would love to try it out.
Mm-hmm.
It looks easier than it probably is.
The muscle that's gonna take just to go like an inch back.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I did a lot of research on this. I kind of wanted, you get a lot of these more medieval fantasy where they have swords,
Swords,
and I kind of wanted to
daggers.
like, yeah, I kind of wanted that to not be an option. Like, there's not necessarily metal work in this world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're pretty much going based on, and like, there's like no gunfire or anything
Right.
advanced. It's everything is archery.
That's what I liked about it, because it's the weapon of choice in fantasy is swords or daggers. Archery is not very common, if anything, so that's what I liked about it the most, because
Thank you.
it's different. So, how do you celebrate finishing a book or writing a chapter? Just to keep yourself motivated and to keep going, because I know sometimes it could probably be overwhelming and hard sometimes to write.
I mean, there are days that like, and especially because I spend my like day job reading other people's work, like then
Right.
sitting down to do my own is sometimes a challenge, especially if I'm
Right.
editing out of genre. Like I'll be editing YA contemporary romance, and then now I have to switch brain gears and move over to
Right.
fantasy. I've tried to set like a timer so that like maybe like just focus on these like just a little bit at a time just to get some words in there. Maybe I'll go out afterwards and like celebrate with a boba. Something fun like that. When I finish a full book though, like go buy myself something a little nice just to be kind of like you did it. Yay.
Yay.
Yay. Now you have to go edit it before
Yeah,
you send it to your editor.
I heard, for example, for construction, they work on their house, another person's house all day, and that's the one thing they don't want to do is work on their own house. So
Hmm.
I can see portraying and editing and going to your own book. I like that a lot. So it's the struggles are real.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And then I have to find some time in there to also read all these new books that are coming out in order to, stay up to date in the
Hmm.
genre. So I either need to learn to write faster or read faster. One of the two.
I think I've resulted in some audiobooks lately just because I have so much I want to read, and it just seems like there's 50 new books that get pumped out every single month I want to read. So,
It's really the struggle is real. I mean, I do audiobooks as well, so that when I'm doing laundry or washing dishes or
hmm.
driving somewhere, I have something, it's like reading a book, trying to find time, make my time useful.
Do you find that you write well in the morning or well in the evening after you're done working?
So I would say I'm better off writing probably in the morning when I'm freshest, but I don't
Hmm.
always get the opportunity to. So I will
Yeah.
try to write in the evening. Now, when I did Fireheart, I wasn't editing. Like my children were really little at that time when I was
Hmm.
writing, so my days were kind of consumed with them. It was really hard to write. I was cranking out 1,000, 2,000 words a night at night. I don't know how
Right.
I rotated to the night because I could not do that now.
So you said that when your children were little, how long did it take you from starting Fireheart, the thought process, getting it on words, and then getting it published? How long did it take you altogether?
Probably like maybe 9 months. I mean,
Okay.
the last quarter of the book, I really pumped out fast. I actually probably started writing this book back in 2000, I want to say 2015,
Okay.
2016. So I actually had this book for a while. I did try to traditionally find an agent for it, and I
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of interest, but eventually I didn't find an agent for it. And I kind of held on to it for a year or two before I came across the publisher that I have now.
Okay. And they helped you publish, of course, right?
Yes, yeah.
That's great.
They
All right.
edited and helped with the cover and everything.
That's awesome. That's what I liked about the colors, a lot of the purple tones on it. So that's really drew my eye to
That that cover
it.
artist is amazing. Her stuff is amazing. She's on Instagram. Like if you look at all her other stuff, they're also beautiful.
Do you have any other works other oh wait, I think I did ask you this. You're working on an anthology of a thriller right now. Is there any
Yeah.
other fantasy books that you're thinking about doing?
I think if I do another fantasy book, there might be a book two for this. I left it kind of open-ended. In the first book, they were just kind of initially dealing with, I don't want to give away everything, but this entity. The idea with the next two books is they would look for, there's this crystal that's mentioned in Fireheart. They would probably go look for the missing pieces of it, and
Ooh,
they would have to
okay.
travel to either to the volcanoes or to the ice lands in order to get the two different pieces.
Well, I'm biased. You write it, please. Oh.
Thank you. I'll work on it. Get my board with all the red strings on it.
Just say this person, book reader, told me so. So no.
So I have to do it.
So obviously, you had this book for a while. Would you do anything differently with this book?
I think plot wise, I'm really happy with the story arc, the way it ended. A little more time on the back end of it, fleshing out like the final scenes, maybe added a little bit more magical elements to it because she does spend a lot of time in the military school where their magic is not necessarily there.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess maybe the book would have been longer.
Hey,
But for the most part, like I'm happy with the characters. I felt like she did evolve without falling prey to too many tropes that the hero's journey through. You know,
right.
I tried to make her where she wasn't whiny or she's too much of the chosen one. I know that's like a really big fantasy trope and it's not the freshest approach. So I didn't want her to be like necessarily the chosen one for this. It just kind of like it kind of happened that way. This was just part of her history as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
some type of being coming down and like you're the one that has to
Save the world.
save the world. Exactly.
I did one time ask about that, about women or female characters being portrayed in
Hmm.
fantasy, and that's the one big turn off for a lot of people is the whiny aspect of it. And I didn't get that at all with your character. I felt like she was very strong, so that's what I like about that. It's sometimes that's what I find hard in YA is the whiny teenage aspect of it, and so that's how I know
Right.
I'm an adult new adult reader, fantasy reader, but I do love when I can get a fantasy that has a little more mature YA
Hmm.
character. I love that.
Thank you.
So, where do you see yourself for 20 years from now? Would you be still writing or just still editing?
I think I would see myself in both. You know, I've tried different careers and I've done different aspects of writing. Number one, I actually really enjoy editing. I love
Right.
helping authors, make a better story. And
Okay.
I feel like I'm good at maybe not necessarily my own work, but in other people's work, I'm very good at massaging the smaller details,
Mm-hmm.
bringing out the different things that are missing in people's work. It's so satisfying to see an author happy after they've gone through this long, excruciating process and they're not alone in. I would love to keep writing. I still enjoy telling stories. I hope in 20 years I have a couple more books under my belt.
I'm like pulling a lot from your editing background as well. But now that
Mhm,
you're
that's
a
okay.
published author, what advice would you give to aspiring fantasy authors who's looking to write their book, looking to get the ideas on paper, and then getting it published?
I would definitely say, I mean, like I know everyone's writing process is different. The importance of a beat sheet and story structure is huge, especially I feel like in fantasy where you're not you're dealing with a lot more challenges than you are in contemporary writing where it exists in a world that actually exists as opposed to a world that you now have made up, created on your own. So there's a lot of, you have to be able to introduce all the aspects of that world to the reader and make it accessible for them to understand. I would say that in addition to that, also reading in the genre, like definitely something that's current and then definitely something that's kind of in the vein of the style of fantasy that you want to read.
Hmm.
Reading other people's work is really so important.
Okay. So what fantasy authors inspires you or
Probably one of my ultimate favorites would be Lady Taylor. I don't know if you're familiar with the Daughter of Smoke and Bone series.
I have that book and I've been hearing so many good things about it. So
So it was written a little while ago, but I
hmm.
mean, as far as, I always get this thing where people are like, "Oh, you write YA." That's not as light. There's a stigma behind it, and I find the right authors. There are some really talented writers out there. The language is not dumbed down. The prose is beautiful. And she would probably be one of them. In fantasy, I try to read a little bit more from writers of color. And
Hmm.
so a few other YA, I'm going to only give YA recommendations
That's
because that's
fine.
what I read. I really like Roshani Chokshi. She wrote A Crown of Wishes. And then another one would be Batahir, which she wrote An Ember in the Ashes. And that's
Okay.
another series. The writer, like in addition to being a writer of color, their writing is beautiful. And
Hmm.
I think they do a tremendous job on world building.
I have all of his books on my bookshelf. I'm like,
I
ugh.
know that if I made an actual pile of the books I haven't read but that I bought, there would be no books on my shelf.
The reader struggles. Okay, so we know your book is available on Amazon. Where else
Mhm.
can we get access to your book, Fireheart?
So it is also on barnesandnoble.com. You can
Okay.
order it from there. You can get it on BookFunnel. If you're on BookFunnel, it's actually priced a little bit lower on BookFunnel.
Okay.
It's a good place to find the ebook if you want the ebook. Those are the main ones. I think the ebook might also be on Kobo. I don't know how many people use that. I feel like it's a lot of Barnes and Noble and Amazon. So because it's on Barnes and Noble, like if you prefer to shop independent, you can do
Mm-hmm.
bookshop.org. They
Okay.
also carry it both, I think, in ebook and print.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if you want signed copies, I have a couple of events coming up. If you're in the Los Angeles area, I have a book signing at Broman's in Pasadena on August 27th. On September 23rd, I'm doing a book event called Pasadena Loves YA, and
Okay.
I'll be on a panel with several other YA authors.
Okay. Yeah, we'll put some of that in the show notes if anybody wants to get in touch with you as an author. Definitely have that information below. Is there anything that you want to say about yourself or about your book or any advice to anybody right before we go?
I would probably say support indie authors.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of great stories out there. And when I say indie authors, it's a little bit of a broad range. I would say it includes small press authors. We're all trying to get our books out there, and there's so many great stories aren't being read because,
Mm-hmm.
we're all trying to find our place at the table.
Right. Definitely rate and review because that definitely helps a
Yes.
lot.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for saying that. That is a struggle. Like I've, given many books out for ARCs and then nobody reviews.
No.
And the thing is, like, I feel like sometimes people are like afraid to like leave a review.
Did,
Their taste in the book isn't what you would want. But
mm-hmm.
honestly, like good or bad, like reviews help us, because it gives us visibility on all these platforms that have reviews.
Right. Especially the Amazon Trojan algorithm and now
Right. I
Goodreads.
think the
So
sweet spot is supposed to be 100, and you start to show up in the newsletter suggestions and on the like, other readers who have read
recommendations.
this recommendations.
Yeah.
Exactly. We need those reviews for visibility.
Okay. I like how you said that because I've always tried to pull advice for other authors too and things like that.
Mhm.
And just to mind readers that good or bad, like you said, it's important. Those reviews are important. And
Yeah, it's okay
so,
to be honest. Don't be afraid to be honest.
right. Not harsh, but honest.
Not harsh, but
Well, thank you, Vanessa, for joining me. I really appreciate your insight and your book. Definitely be posting in the show notes how to get access to your book. Definitely looking forward to anything else you publish in the future as well.
thank you. Thank you so much for having me on here. This is a lot of fun. I love talking books.
Thank you, readers, for listening to my podcast on fantasy books. I hope you're enjoying the content and finding it helpful in discovering new books to read. If you have a moment, please consider leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. Also, don't forget to follow me on Instagram at BookTrovertReader to stay updated on new episodes and other book-related content. Thank you again for your support, and happy reading!